Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. In less than a month, Donald Trump fired two top officials. Not one, two. First, the Secretary of Homeland Security, then, the Attorney General. These are not minor positions. These are pillars of the federal government, national security, law enforcement, the legal backbone of the presidency itself. So here's the real question. Is this chaos? Or is this strategy? Because on the surface it looks like instability. Headlines about firings, internal tensions, policy disagreements, the usual Washington narrative, dysfunction, disorder, a presidency under pressure. But if you step back and look at the pattern, not just the events, but the timing, the targets, and the context, a very different picture starts to emerge. This isn't random, and it's not reactive. What we're seeing right now is something much more deliberate. This is not a simple personnel shakeup. This is a controlled, targeted restructuring of power happening in real time, under pressure, and with very specific objectives. And to understand why, you have to understand the moment Trump is in right now, because he's not just dealing with one crisis. He's dealing with two at the same time. Outside, there's a war. Inside, there's a political countdown. And when you're fighting on two fronts, you don't keep the same team. Let's start with the external pressure. The war with Iran has entered a dangerous phase. It's no longer a short-term confrontation or a limited exchange. It's dragging on. It's becoming unpredictable, and most importantly, it's starting to create consequences back home. Oil prices are rising, markets are reacting, allies are uneasy. And perhaps most importantly, the narrative is slipping. What was initially framed as strength, decisiveness, deterrence, control is now being questioned. Is the strategy clear? Is the endgame defined? Is this escalation or improvisation? These are the kinds of questions that don't just stay in policy circles. They move into the public space, they shape perception, and perception in politics is reality. Now add the second front, the midterm elections, because while the war is unfolding abroad, the political clock is ticking at home. And if Republicans lose control of Congress, the consequences are immediate and severe. Investigations, hearings, subpoenas, legal exposure, not just for the administration, but potentially for the president himself and his inner circle. That changes everything. Because now, this isn't just about governance, it's about survival. And when survival is on the line, you don't just manage your team. You recalibrate it. That's the key word here. Recalibration. Trump is not cleaning house in the traditional sense. He's not purging indiscriminately. He's not reacting emotionally. What he's doing is much more calculated. He's restructuring his core team to match the phase he's entering. Think about the positions he's already changed. Homeland Security, Justice. These are not symbolic roles. These are operational centers of power. Homeland Security controls enforcement, border policy, internal security infrastructure. It's where political pressure from immigration, law enforcement, controversies, and federal authority all converge. The Justice Department. That's where legal battles are fought, where investigations are handled, where the line between law and politics becomes blurred in high-stakes environments. If you're preparing for a period of intensified political conflict, potentially legal conflict, these are exactly the positions you adjust first. So this isn't random. This is sequencing. And once you see it that way, the broader logic becomes clear. Trump is not just reshuffling his team. He's reinforcing control. That control shows up in three very specific ways. First, execution consistency. In a high-pressure environment, especially one involving internal disagreement, is not just inconvenient, it's dangerous. It creates mixed signals. It weakens messaging. It opens the door for both domestic criticism and international miscalculation. So what do? You tighten alignment. You make sure that the people in key positions are not just competent, not just loyal, but synchronized. Same message, same posture, same strategic direction. Second, political liability management. Every administration carries risk. But in moments like this, certain individuals can become focal points for criticism, whether it's policy failures, media narratives, or operational controversies. And when that happens, keeping them in place becomes more costly than replacing them, so you make a move not necessarily because they failed, but because the cost of keeping them has increased. Third, preparation for escalation. Not just military escalation, but political and legal escalation. If the next phase involves more aggressive policy, more confrontational politics, more legal battles, then you need people who are built for that environment. Not managers, operators. Not caretakers, fighters. And this brings us to the next question, the one everyone is asking: who's next? Because once you recognize the pattern, you start looking for the next move, the next adjustment, the next name. And one name that keeps coming up is Tulsi Gabbard. Now, this is where things get interesting, because Gabbard is not an obvious target. She's not incompetent. She's not under scandal. She hasn't made a major operational mistake. In fact, in many ways, she brings something unique to the administration, something few others do. She has cross-party appeal. She has credibility with anti-war voters. She represents a bridge between political worlds that don't usually connect. So why is her name even in the conversation? Because in Trump's system, the biggest risk isn't always failure. Sometimes it's divergence. And when it comes to the Iran conflict, Gabbard represents something that doesn't fully align with the current trajectory. She's been more cautious, more skeptical of escalation, less willing to fully embrace the aggressive posture that defines Trump's approach right now. And that, in a different moment, might be an asset. But in this moment, it creates tension. Because in a wartime or near wartime environment, the expectation inside a national security team is not just competence. It's cohesion, it's unity of message, it's clarity of direction. And when someone operates even slightly outside that alignment, it raises questions, not just about policy, but about control. That tension became more visible when people within her orbit began publicly questioning the justification for military action. Whether she directly endorsed those views or not, almost doesn't matter. In politics, perception moves faster than nuance. And the perception became this: she's not fully in sync. That's a problem. Not necessarily a fatal one, but a real one. And according to multiple reports, Trump has already asked advisors whether she should be replaced. He's explored options. He's tested the idea. Which tells you one thing very clearly: she's on the radar. She's in the system. She's being evaluated. But, and this is the critical part, she has not been removed. Not yet. And that brings us to the second layer of the analysis. If there's tension, if there's consideration, if there's even dissatisfaction, why hasn't Trump acted? The answer goes back to something we talked about earlier: control of timing. Because what Trump is doing right now is not just about who to remove. It's about when to remove them. He has already made 2 major changes in a short period of time. That creates momentum, but it also creates risk. Move too fast, and the narrative shifts from decisive leadership to instability, and that's a line he clearly does not want to cross. In fact, in recent days, he has pushed back on reports suggesting a broader purge. He has downplayed the idea of widespread changes. He has, in effect, slowed the narrative down. That's not hesitation, that's pacing. At the same time, there's another constraint: replacements. It's one thing to identify a problem, it's another to solve it. And in high-level positions, especially in national security and intelligence, the pool of viable, trusted, politically aligned candidates is limited. You don't just remove someone unless you have someone ready. Because a vacancy at that level isn't neutral, it's destabilizing. And right now, there doesn't appear to be a clear, ready alternative who checks all the boxes: loyalty, alignment, capability, and confirmation viability. That matters. Then there's the third factor: political value. Gabbard is not just another official. She represents something broader. A former Democrat, a critic of establishment politics, a figure with appeal outside the traditional Republican base. In an election cycle, that matters. Removing her doesn't just solve an internal alignment issue. It potentially creates an external perception problem. It narrows the coalition. It sends a signal, and in a moment where every signal is amplified, that cost has to be weighed. So when you put it all together, her current position becomes very clear. She is not secure. But she is not immediate. She sits in what you might call the watch zone, evaluated, considered, but not yet acted upon. And that leads to the final and most important question: what determines whether she stays or goes? The answer is not internal, it's external. It's the trajectory of the Iran conflict. If the situation escalates, if the administration doubles down, adopts a more aggressive posture, moves toward a harder line strategy, then alignment becomes non-negotiable. And in that scenario, someone like Gabbard becomes increasingly out of place. The pressure to replace her rises. The justification becomes easier. The timing becomes right. But if the conflict stabilizes or becomes politically costly, something different happens. Voices of caution gain value. Dissent becomes an asset. Balance becomes a strategy. And in that scenario, she may not just survive. She may become useful. That's the dynamic. That's the calculation. And that's why the answer to "is she next?" is not simple. Because this isn't a list. It's a system. A system driven by pressure, timing, alignment, and strategy. So here's the real takeaway. Trump is not done reshaping his team, not even close. But he's not doing it all at once. He's doing it in phases, controlled, targeted, strategic. This is not chaos. This is not a breakdown. This is a recalibration under pressure. A wartime adjustment, not just of policy, but of power. So will Gabbard be next? Maybe, but that's not the most important question. The real question is this: as the pressure increases externally and internally, who fits the next phase and who doesn't? Because in this environment, it's not about who you were. It's about whether you still match where the system is going. And that answer can change very quickly. Thanks for watching.